So I listen to podcasts on a pretty regular basis, and it gives me an opportunity to share some really important stuff with you. Today is no different because today I'm able to share a podcast about Howard Lutnick, who is a White House insider, and he reveals how the U.S. can cut taxes without raising debt in the All In podcast. So I have a breakdown of what happened in today's podcast, and there will be a copy of this or a link to this in the show notes here at the very end in the description. So stay tuned because I think you're going to be really well served by hearing what Lutnick has to say. Maybe it will satisfy some of your curiosities. It could increase some additional fears, but most of all, biggest thing we're doing here is trying to make informed thoughts and informed decisions about where we are going in politics and how it affects us, because the Trump economy is a real thing, and there is an economic strategy that goes along with Trump as well. So let's check this out. So, budget reform and spending cuts. One of the things that Lutnick really did emphasize was the need to cut wasteful government spending. Now, that also means not just cutting, but really kind of updating the way our government operates, using some of the antiquated systems that are out there, whether it's some of the computer systems that they really don't even barely run on anymore, some of the operating systems, etc., but also the use of technology to really kind of speed up and make government more efficiently. So the idea would be that there's less reliance on income taxes to fund government programs, which sounds kind of like a great idea. Secondly, having more efficient government services. Like, have you ever been on the phone with the IRS before? Have you been on the phone with Medicare before? If that's the case, you kind of know where Lutnick's coming from, and sometimes the government is really filled with inefficiency. But there's one other thing here, too, that Lutnick mentions right off the snap, which is, hey, if we could lower the national debt, it's going to have a substantial impact on inflation, it'll have a substantial impact on interest rates, and most importantly, provide that all-important reserve currency status of the U.S. dollar, because we want the dollar to be king and not forget about it. Here's another thing that Lutnick said. Let's check it out. So another thing to consider was Lutnick mentioned tariff strategies and also international trade. So like the president, his people say that, this tariff thing, that is a tax on imports coming into the country, stuff made in other countries being shipped into the United States. They said that, a tax on those imports could really help generate revenue instead of relying heavily on income taxes, right? And the income taxes are just money made right here inside the United States off your paycheck. So the idea is if we're taxing foreign goods more, the government could reduce its dependence on U.S. workers and businesses in filling the gap of spending, because that money has to come from somewhere, and guess right now, it's coming for you and me. But there's more than that. There's also encouraging companies to manufacture inside of the United States. Heck, I find it kind of disturbing that a company like Ford, which is an all-American company, right, actually produces all kinds of stuff outside of the United States. Heck, is there anything more American than the F-150? Well, sure enough, taking a look at some of the metals that are put into that car, well, we find out that those metals are not made inside of the United States. The tariffs could really change that and put more American workers into real manufacturing jobs, and those jobs pay. Howard Lutnick also throws out the Trump card. We also know that as the $5 million visa proposal that the president's kicking around. Now, of course, Lutnick says that the president throws ideas out, but make sure you know for certain that whatever the president throws out is usually really super well vetted inside of his cabinet. His people, his advisors will say, hey, Mr. President, and throw an idea out. Then the president will call them back and say, hey, I like that idea. I'm going to mention it today. So the $5 million Visa card is one of those ideas. The policy would allow wealthy foreigners to buy U.S. visas, which will allow them a status to come inside the United States. The idea, though, is that $5 million had to be invested in some way, shape, or form into the U.S. economy, or just pay the $5 million. The idea is to raise billions of dollars in government revenue without increasing taxes on American workers. And once again, this is a businessman being creative with a solution that really could work for the United States. So I would say, hey, let's figure out some of these ideas. Maybe they're great ideas. Maybe they're just floated out there. But I like the fact that there's a problem-solving mechanism in place. And what do? You test an idea, and whether that idea works or not, or you go back to the drawing board and you learn all over again. Let's check out Lutnick's next insight from the White House. Once again, all about Trump's economic strategy. So, like tax policies and international loopholes, they are for real. And there's been companies, and I love the fact that Lutnick is actually calling this out. So the Republicans get a rap that they're all about big business. Well, check out what Lutnick's saying here. He's saying that he is really criticizing countries like Ireland for offering lower corporate tax rates, which encourages U.S. companies to move overseas and be bad actors. Why? Because they're trying to avoid paying U.S. taxes. And that doesn't sound like a very American thing to do, to avoid U.S. taxes, right? But one country's gaining, and we're definitely losing. So Lutnick's saying that the White House is really thinking about coming down on those companies. His proposed solution could make U.S. companies more competitive globally, one. Secondly, prevent tax evasion, potentially increasing government revenue, and most of all, taxing individuals a little bit more if they're pulling this kind of nonsense. So it's a very, very healthy thought here. So Lutnick could not go through this interview without mentioning Elon Musk. And, you know, he kind of mentions him in a very, very favorable way. And so he throws out this idea about how important Elon's been in helping President Trump out. And that Elon stepped right up because he loves America. He loves the fact that, well, the United States is his home, and he came here from South Africa, but he loves the American idea, he loves the American spirit, and he doesn't want to see the United States really put itself in a bad position, so he's offered his services for free to the United States. So he talked about Elon Musk and these federal spending cuts. Lutnick says that Lutnick recalled how Musk mistakenly said that he'd cut $2 trillion from federal spending instead of $1 trillion. The agreed amount was $1 trillion, but the idea was they were going to raise $1 trillion and they were going to cut $1 trillion. So the point was kind of aggressive spending cuts are possible and necessary if spending's lowered responsibly, and it could mean, hey, let's face it, a lower U.S. federal deficit, which all of us should be in favor of, and less need to raise taxes, and of course, with that, propping up the United States as the world's reserve currency, lowering inflation, and of course, lowering interest rates, because we get preferred rates with lower debt. The final and maybe the most important thing are the closing statements and the closing observations Lutnick makes, which I think you're going to really want to stick around for. Well, in conclusion, Howard Lutnick is saying that the proposals really could suggest that income taxes could be reduced or stabilized if the government raises enough money via the tariffs and the visas, closes international tax loopholes, and reduces wasteful spending, right? But these aren't really strategies that aren't going to generate enough revenue, then, well, taxes still could go up. So I just wanted to make sure that we're kind of giving you some insight from the White House. So we say insider insight from the White House, which kind of gives us a better idea of what's going on. And listen, I'm not taking sides here. I'm not a Democrat. I'm not a Republican. But I do want to make sure that we're really being thoughtful about this. And if I could find something that I could share with my audience that might help you make better sense out of the big picture here, then this is a perfect way to do so. Hi, I'm Brian. Make sure you hit subscribe and like, because I love sharing this information with you. I love your comments and, of course, your thoughtful comments. Please subscribe, please like, and I will be sure to deliver more information right to your inbox. Thank you.